Good afternoon and welcome to this very exciting and interesting event with the Awakened Heart Sangha. My name is Dashu. I'm one of Lama Shenpen's students, and I've got the wonderful opportunity to introduce this talk and this afternoon's teachings. And in a minute or two, I'll introduce Lama Shenpen and Elizabeth, who will ask to give us a kind of an insight into their thinking and their minds as they have a discussion. But before we do, I also just want to bring in Nico Odessio, and he's the president of Shambhala Publications. Hi, Nico. I just want to ask you just to share a few words about what it was that kind of why publish this? And I'm sure you get a lot of submissions, so I'm interested just to hear a few words from you, if that's all right.
Sure. Thank you, Dashu. And thank you, Lama Shenpen and Elizabeth, for inviting me just to say a couple words here. When this book came in as a project through its editor, Casey Kemp, I was delighted just because there's so much misunderstanding about the role of the guru, whether spanning from the more Theravada sense of the Kalanamitra or to the Vajramaster of Tantric Buddhism. And it was just such a relief as I went through the manuscript initially, just seeing how comprehensive and sensitive and thoughtful account that Lama Shenpen has put together here. And, just in this era of sort of mistrust of organized religion and things like that, it's just so important for these really clear, strong presentations that really present what the tradition has to say. And I was also really happy that it didn't just come from the Tibetan tradition. It's a very, in particular, the Theravada and Tibetan traditions and sort of the range of the role of the teacher in Buddhism. And so I jumped right on it and was thrilled that we have such a wonderful new account. And thank you so much for doing this, Lama Shenpen.
Thank you for publishing it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. So I know that you need to drop out at any point, so thank you for coming, and I hope to speak to you again soon. So now I'd like to welcome Lama Shenpen, and for those people who are here who maybe aren't members of the Sangha, I wanted to say just a couple of words of introduction of Lama Shenpen and Elizabeth. It's probably better for them to read Keeping the Dalai Lama Waiting. It has a much fuller account of your life story, but just in a couple of sentences, Lama Shenpen has been practicing Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition for over 50 years, and since being sent to India to learn meditation by Trungpa Rinpoche, sending her off to Karma Tinley Rinpoche to learn meditation. And then from there, she met her wonderful teachers of Bukha Rinpoche and Kala Rinpoche, taking ordination as a nun from His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, who then sent her off to the West to teach, where she translated for Gendon Rinpoche and then met her main teacher, Khenpo Sogyam Gyamtso Rinpoche, before coming over to the UK, meeting Rigzin Shikpo. And she's been here in North Wales in semi-retreat and teaching, well, over 20 years now. And so welcome, Lama Shenpen. And Elizabeth Callahan, who has done 2 3-year retreats with Kala Rinpoche and a long-term student of Khenpo Rinpoche also. Translator of some very important, huge Tibetan texts with her work as a fellow at Sadra Foundation, including something that's been amazingly beneficial to myself personally. Moonbeams of Mahamudra, and other books by Jamgon Control Lojitaye. I think you're working on one at the moment as well, Elizabeth. So I'll leave Lama Shenpen to say a few more words. So just to welcome you both and thank you for having this discussion. And I'll pass it over to you to enjoy your conversation. But first, I think Lama Shenpen, I want to start this off by asking you a question about what was the main influence for you writing this book, and particularly in the way that you've written it, as Nico was saying, with this kind of balanced expanse of not just Tibetan Buddhism, but also the Theravada coming from the Pali sources. And I'll trust in you two to have the rest of your conversation.
Thank you, Dashi, and thank you, Nico. So just I wanted to start by saying thank you to the people who reviewed the book, especially Her Holiness Khandro Rinpoche, who wrote to say she regretted she couldn't be here, but she was in retreat. She wished us well, which was very sweet of her. And messages from Jetsoma Tenzin Palmo, who said, well, it's a bit late in the day for her at the moment, but she really wanted to be here. And then Lama Deni, who's an old friend who's he's in the middle of a Guru Rinpoche puja, and said, well, I guess if I'm going to miss it for anything, that's a good thing to miss it for, being Guru Rinpoche Day. And it being on Guru principle, but I'm hoping that we will have an opportunity to discuss the book with him on another occasion, and with Tenzin Palmo. I've had messages from Subhuti from the Triratna, and Throstle Hole, Daisha Morgan from Throstle Hole Zen community. So, and Lama Tashi Llama from and Lama Lundrup. So various Western lamas are sort of listening in, and I hope we will have an opportunity for them to join in it. Maybe not today, but at some point. And yeah, there's even some members of my family, which is nice, and from the European Buddhist Teachers Group. So, and MAPA Network and Awaken Heart Sangha, and goodness knows who else is here. There's over 150 people at the last count. So thank you everybody for turning up. And I did want to say a few more words about Elizabeth. That yeah, she started practicing in her early 20s, very similar to myself. And as Dashi said, she did 2-3 year retreats. The second one, she was teaching already, and I think she's kept that up ever since. And she met Khenpo Rinpoche there when she was in the retreat center. He used to go there and teach. And then these great works that she's translated, I mean, great thick works, very scholarly, with very good learned footnotes. I mean, they're a source of tremendous amount of knowledge. And of course, she's the executive director for the MAPA Foundation, which is really very important for all of Khenpo Rinpoche's students, as well as being director of advanced study and scholarship at the Sadra Foundation. I mean, she's quite a major figure in the Buddhist world and doing wonderful work. I mean, I'm really one of your greatest admirers. That the way you are as a practitioner, that's kind of just so cool and calm, and getting on with it and not making a fuss, and just really showing how to be a good teacher for all of us, really. And it's interesting that I have this, people are calling me Lama, but actually part of our discussion would be, well, Elizabeth doesn't call herself Lama, and sort of the reasons for that, which are really interesting. And, I do discuss in my book. But Elizabeth and I have, of course, known each other since the 80s, when she came to Oxford with Khenpo Rinpoche as a translator. I might have met before, but I remember that. And and over the years. And we keep in touch and we have these discussions with each other. So a lot of what I'm writing has been informed by the sort of discussions I've been having with Elizabeth and others as my colleagues over the years. So it's nice to now give you all the opportunity to see us, how we've been discussing it over the years, to inform your own discussions of the same topics. Yes, because she's taught in the 3-year retreat, and she's also requested to teach the 6 yogas in different sanghas. So she's got experience of different sanghas around the Buddhist world. And one of the things we often talk about is how people are understanding the Dharma and understanding the Guru and understanding how to relate to it all, especially in terms of the Mahamudra meditation tradition. And she's visited us a couple of times, and we've benefited from her being here. And yes, and discussing really how to teach Buddhism in the West and what are the things that we have to face. So I think it's great that you've all got an opportunity to listen to this discussion. Then I just thought because people won't have had the book yet, and we'll be referring to various things, but in the book itself, I discuss what does it mean to say a Buddhist teacher. One of the reasons for wanting to write this book is because in the West, it's kind of culturally quite a foreign thing. And when the texts talk about teachers, they talk about as if it's a defined category. And yet when you look, you find, it's not on the ground. Anybody could just say they're a Buddhist teacher, and then everything they say about Buddhist teachers would apply to them, but they're so general. And who are we actually talking about? And when we're talking about having a teachers' meeting, a Buddhist teachers' meeting, who would we invite, and on what basis? What makes a teacher a teacher? So it sort of starts off with various aspects of that, including how we use titles and insignia and ways of authenticating teachers. And then there's the second part, which I look at the Pali Sutta teachings, especially in the Kalama and the Chanki Sutta. And I think the Chanki Sutta is just, the Buddha really describes how to relate to a teacher, that you're really learning about the true nature of your mind or your being, how you go about it blow by blow. It's just so clear and so up to date and so accessible. I really love that part, really. It's one of my favorite places to go when talking about the Guru. And then there's another section about how we relate to the teacher in the Buddhist tradition, like the whole sense of spiritual friendship, the sense of what the Buddha said about that, about Buddha Smriti, the practice of actually thinking on contemplating the qualities of the Buddha, which is a practice right through the Buddhist tradition. It's not just in the certainly just not in the Tibetan, but not just in Mahayana. It's everywhere. And then how that then shouldn't say it becomes, but how that's expressed really in the Guru Yoga that you get in the practice traditions like the Mahamudras of the Tantric traditions. And then breaking down the roles that a teacher might play. And this really arose from, over the years, trying to make sense of what is meant when the Tibetans talk about the Guru, and it's, in Tibetan, that's llama, and llama is like the source of all wisdom and the whole, it's like God, really. It's sort of like everything comes back down to the Lama, the Guru, and it sounds as if there's just one, but actually it's one in principle, but it's many in expression, let's put it that way. And the teachers, when we're looking for a teacher, we're looking for teachers to play different roles for us. And and I list them as 12, which I kind of made the list myself as I looked around at the different kinds of people and what they were doing. I think, well, that teacher does that, but they don't do that and that, but they do that. And so different teachers do, some of them just do one of these roles, some of them try to do all of them, some of them just do one or two. And this is something which is going to be very interesting talking to Elizabeth about. And it finishes off with frequently asked questions. So this is interesting for people who've been around the Buddhist scene for some time and have been heard things said and then wondering, so how does that fit in? So that kind of covers quite a few areas. So that's basically what the book's doing. And basically the reason I wrote it, really, what inspired me to write it, I was inspired to write it because my own trying to work it out for myself. And as I worked it out for myself bit by bit, I think over the decades, I think I started this in the 80s. I did write an article in the 80s for Sharper conference at one time, but really trying to work out for myself, how are we going to relate to this idea of the guru? Because I'd spent so many years living with Tibetans and seeing how they talked about the guru, how they related to the guru. And I picked it up as a cultural thing. But Westerners don't have that cultural. So they don't have somebody to ask. They don't have somebody to watch to see what they're doing. So it makes it much more difficult, and things have to be spelt out, which for Tibetans don't need to be spelt out. And that relates to those people who've read Keeping the Dalai Lama Waiting will remember how annoyed I got with Khenpo Rinpoche when he said, this guru thing, we don't have a problem with it. It's a Westerner's problem. It's nothing to do with us. I was so annoyed. But then this book has sort of sprung out of that feeling of frustration that people don't stand a chance if they don't have that background. So perhaps that's enough reason, enough sense of what inspired me. I certainly wasn't inspired by all the recent furore about discovering abuse within different sanghas, some of it relating to teachers, although since that has been going on in Buddhism as much as it's going on in every other institution, it seems, there are people who are particularly upset about this issue of guru and the authority of gurus. And so it's timely in that sense, but it certainly wasn't inspired by that. It was inspired, as Nico was pointing out, it was inspired by the tradition itself and how much it had to offer and how we have to approach it with our eyes open and understanding what it is we're looking for. So that's enough of me. How are we doing? Not too bad. So where shall we begin, Elizabeth?
Does Dashu have a jumping off point for us?
Otherwise, I have.
Well, then let's go with your jumping off point, Lama.
No, I would like to ask Elizabeth how she sees her own role, because she's, she's so immensely qualified as a practitioner, as well as a scholar and, in every way. And yet she doesn't use the title Lama. And then there's cheeky little me, who's referred to as Lama all the time, even by Tibetan lamas, they're calling me Lama too, which I think, I don't know quite how that happened, but I think it's interesting for people to hear. Not so much about the title, but about, your own experience as a teacher.
Not so much about the title. Well, anyway, first of all, thank you, Lama Shenpen, for this very, very nice introduction. And thank you again for inviting me to have this conversation with you, with lots of other people watching who we can't see, which is always very funny. So you're jumping into a number of issues, and I have some points on my mind too that I'd love us to make sure we talk about. One of them is your title, Guru as Principal. And I think that also connects with some of your inspirations for writing the book. What you said is because a lot of us come very inspired to study Buddhism in the Tibetan traditions, but because we're coming from different cultural backgrounds, we often have preconceived ideas that we don't even recognize that we have. But we're also lacking in a lot of sort of general knowledge that is also sort of expected of us, but we don't have it. And so one of the things we all need to do is sort of learn the general principles of Buddhism, which includes how we relate to teacher and what we mean by teacher, or what we mean by guru, or what we mean by llama. And so I'm really thrilled that you've written this book and now it's been published, and so that we can all join in this conversation about what does it mean to be a Buddhist teacher, and all of us examine ourselves, our roles and our contributions, and take responsibility for it, because when it comes down to it, we're all we're all in this together. We're all in this. All of us who are inspired by the Buddhist path have a responsibility to ourselves and others. And we as students have a responsibility to ourselves and to others. And we who serve in roles as teachers have it too. And the best, way we can go about that, I think, is by talking about it. But to be specific, so what do I do? That's a good question. I do. So in many ways, I'm a lifelong student and explorer, and I get more and more interested and curious about it all as I go along. And I'm, like many, aware more and more about how much I don't know. And I find that actually also inspiring. But as far as how someone like myself, contributes, and I guess you would say it as a teacher, it's been more as someone who shares practice instructions. So I have a certain type of training, and I've kept some of it up a lot that I'm interested in. And I continued after my 3-year retreats to study specifically with Khenpo Tsultrim, as you know, which really built on what I had done in the retreats and was very complementary. So I hadn't done a lot of study, which is not uncommon, before I had gone into retreat. A whole other kind of subject to talk about. But I had the opportunity to do that, to study in ways that was complementary to meditation training, so more on view. And that really helped. And so then I felt more confident in being able to share the instructions that we had received in retreat, which are very technique-based and not as view-based. But I find blending the two to be very helpful. So that's the only way I've been really drawn into a kind of role of an instructor, is through that. A little bit as a translator. As a translator, you're often seen as somebody who knows the text well. You should, if you're translating them. And so somehow very often translators are called on to teach a text, or in my case, I take it more as facilitate others learning, studying the text, studying and practicing the text. I'll pause there.
It's interesting how you describe yourself as an instructor of practices and the doctrine, both, I would say, like sharing your expertise, but you're not talking about taking on students, your own personal students, or building a sangha, or rituals, performing rituals, or giving vows and commitments. These are various other roles that a teacher might play. But you certainly are giving an example. We all watch your example and we're very inspired by it. And in that sense, already, that's a role of a guru, isn't it? To be an inspiration and to be able to pass down accurately being able to transmit the meaning of the teachings. So I can see quite a few roles there that you are playing really to the utmost, and then other roles that you're sidestepping and leaving to other people to deal with, I think, would be how you'd see that.
Of course, the roles one plays are often things one's asked to do. And so one of the things I heard early on, and you find it in the text, was the admonishment to not teach before your time. Mm-hmm. And I was trained early on, that your teacher would tell you when to teach. So that has often been, I think this is true in a lot of sanghas, like people sort of wait until they're asked. But that's not the only way. I mean, often there's a need and people will appropriately, I would say, step in for that need. And in my case, I've spent a lot of time as a translator. So that in and of itself takes up a lot of time. So thank goodness there are other people who are building sanghas, such as yourself, and thinking about how we teach and train. And then also this very important question of how do we transmit? Who transmits? How do we transmit? Because we are in that process of ourselves absorbing, practicing, contemplating, and in one way or another being conduits for others, like passing it on. And particularly our generation, and particularly as Westerners, we are a transitional generations. I don't think it's just you're a little bit older than me, and there are lots of people younger than me that I think we're all part of, sort of multi-generation transmission, both from another culture, but also just of Buddhism, of the essence and principles of Buddhism. And so acknowledging our roles in that is important, and being clear about what we can do and maybe what we're don't feel capable of doing or aren't in the role of doing that. And that's why I like your dividing up the roles that people play as teachers, because lots of us come to Tibetan Buddhism, and one of the first things that we hear or we kind of pick up is, oh, you need a teacher. And we don't even know what that means.
That's right. That's right. And then in terms of more specifically, they'll say you need a llama. So if somebody were to say to you, well, I need a llama, you're a llama, what would you say?
Take your time.
Take your time in deciding who your llama is. But would you say that you were a suitable candidate?
No.
Interesting.
Well, no. Let me just take a step back. So when you say somebody says I need a llama, and I would say take your time, meaning study, practice, be with the traditions, the sanghas, see what suits you, and through that process, people come to know themselves as Buddhist practitioners, and they'll come to know the community, the sangha. They'll come to know the teachers. They'll with the kind of right education, understand what we mean, start to understand what we mean by llama, hopefully, and what we maybe don't mean, what might have been like, sort of our fanciful ideas. We hear these stories, fabulous stories of Mahasiddhas. You get hit on the head with a sandal and you're awake, and who doesn't want that? But that will come in some form at some time, but most likely we're not people who are going to experience that in this lifetime. And so forming a relationship with our Sangha, our community, and with teachers, possibly. I don't I don't serve as a guide for individuals, individual people, the way you have established a Sangha and you're offering people to come as beginners and as experienced practitioners to come and be part of a tradition and a lineage, to be guided and be guides. So in that way, I'm an add-on, an adjunct.
You certainly. Sorry.
That's awesome. That's also a nice place to be, and it's you contribute what you can, actually. Yeah.
I certainly, in our Sangha, we certainly appreciate what you have to offer us. So we've created a Sangha situation which we can invite you into to teach us, and also quite a few of our Sangha have benefited from joining in your study course on the moonbeams, which you've been doing for nearly 2 years now, I think. Sort of a regular going through the text, which it really demonstrates how important your role is. And I would certainly call you Lama, because I would. But it's interesting, we were discussing this morning the difference between the term guru and the term Lama, and how both of us, okay, you can call me Lama, but if you start calling me guru, I start to feel rather uncomfortable. And that's a really interesting point, because Tibetans wouldn't feel uncomfortable, generally speaking. So it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and can you say more about why you would feel uncomfortable with that?
I think it's because I don't think people think in terms of the guru principle. I think in Tibetan, you would think in terms of the guru principle. In principle, I am actually teaching Dharma. You are learning Dharma from me. So in principle, I am guru. And they don't have the or in Tibetan. It's not a guru or the guru. It's just guru. And yeah, there's no arguing. If you're playing the role of guru, you're guru. But they would think of it as the principle that it's the Buddha teaches the Dharma, and then the people practice it and pass on the teaching to each other as a personal teacher. And what is it about? It's about realizing the guru, that is your own true nature. So it's you can understand it from all those different points of view all at once. So if you don't want to take it on personally that you're guru, you just think in principle, in general, okay, you can call me guru. You don't take it personally. Whereas in English, if I were to say I was a guru, I think people would think it was a very, I was actually setting myself up as a guru in a way that it doesn't sound like that if you say it in the original language.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the connotations of a word, that guru has that connotation, whereas there's a question of whether Lama does or does not. And that is definitely something that's changing, I think, over the decades, as more and more people are using the term, both Western and Asian, and multi-generational. And it also brings up the question of terminology. I mean, how is how are names, titles, actually, helpful, which they are in many ways, and how are they also fraught? And so you're touching on it with guru, and so it's a very interesting one. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that and why, and also to just keep in mind, I'd love to hear you talk about title, guru principle, and you were just touching on that. Guru as person, guru as Buddha, awakened being, guru as our own nature. You can pick where you want to start.
Well, I think the title one is very interesting in the sense that as soon as you give somebody a title, you've created a class of people who don't have that title. So you've created a mandala boundary, which will be emotional because mandala boundaries are always very emotional. So it's quite an emotional issue. Am I entitled to that title or not? Or are they entitled to the title or not? So why are they and they're not? So it starts to go into, and then it invites projection, because whatever notions people have about somebody in authority or somebody who's got a title, they get projected onto that person. So it's, I can understand when teachers say, and a lot of Western teachers don't call themselves lamas. They don't see it's necessary. They don't find it necessary. And they're happier not to have that title. So I can appreciate that. But then on the other hand, if they are authentic teachers and they're in a discussion and somebody who really hasn't a clue is sort of holding forth as if they know what's what, you kind of, if you're treated in the same way, as if you also, it's just your opinion, when in fact you're standing for something, it's very difficult to assert that. It might be difficult. Whereas if you already have a title, there will be a tendency for people to see you as authority, and you will be able to authenticate the tradition for people. So, if somebody says something and you are then to say, actually, that's not right, other people would listen because you have the title. You can argue you don't need a title for that to be the case. The people might know you. They might know that you know. So I'm not saying, if you don't have a title, you don't have that kind of authority. But within a Sangha setup, if people are coming in and they see all these people, and then somebody starts holding forth, they don't know if this person is speaking for the whole Sangha or if it's just their opinion. Whereas if they had a title, then you would know straight away. So I noticed that different Sanghas, even Tibetan Buddhist Sanghas, are adopting different titles for different kinds of teachers, because this is an issue. At a certain point, you want to know who are you speaking for? Is this just your opinion, or are you actually in some way, have you got some authority? So authentication and authorization are two very major topics in my book, really. Not that I'm giving you the answers, but it's raising it. If you've got a transmission lineage, when does it count as a transmission that is actually liberating from samsara? It's an awakening transmission. And when is it not? How do we know when it's authentic? How do we know who's got the authority to say it's authentic or not? Who's got the authority to pass it on as authentic? It's very in Buddhism, the whole thing is about the truth of our true nature that the Buddha awakened to. So you need your own true nature to be recognized. You need it needs to conform to what the Buddhists taught and passed down, and it needs to be authenticated by somebody who's actually able to talk to you face to face and have that. You could say assessment, but it's a natural assessment that goes with knowing somebody and having a proper conversation with them, that you actually get a sense that something is being understood and passed on. So I've lost track of what I was saying now.
Mm. This is, may I jump in and ask you to speak a little bit about, you brought up 2 points about, well, it's authentic teachers. So authentic teachers and authentic teaching. These are our 2 things we transmit in Buddhism. You know, Lungi Chu, so the Dharma of scripture, and Tokpe Chu, the Dharma of realization. So as teachers or just the human beings, we are concerned with passing on the Dharma in both its forms, in the form of scripture. So I'm engaged a lot with that as a translator, right? But then there's that intangible quality of realization or experience, the human quality of how does it transform my mind stream. And so as people being, it is important to others to have some of the signs of authenticity, authentic teachers, and and this is, and with it comes a huge responsibility. And that's actually what I'm sort of thinking about, that we all need to think about more individually and collectively. It's one thing, to just give people titles, but with that, what authority are they being given? Is it clear what authority they're being given? And what's their responsibility? Do they understand it? Are they capable of manifesting that with the usual, we're all human beings with our foibles, and you can grow into a position that you might not have been that great at to begin with, but you'll get better. But how do we help you? How do we collectively as the community and sanghas help you with both those things? Because a lot of times people are given these responsibilities without necessarily so much guidance and authority, and then they stumble. And when they stumble, it's hard not only for them, but it's hard for the others around them.
These are big questions, aren't they?
So for you, how does that tie into where you started with this about guru as principle?
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting when you talk about what inspired me to write the book. I think it started when I was sort of around 40 and started to think about, how are we going to, I've been told to go and teach whatever I knew, and I'd only been around a very short time. I don't know, just 5-10 years of practice, and then go and teach everything you know. And it's sort of like, on what basis was that? And then I was set loose as being a teacher, and I felt very strongly, yes, we need a situation that I had where I was able to talk to authentic teachers, one-to-one, daily, on a daily basis. And somehow I imbibed that, and that's what people need. They need a Sangha situation. They need a situation where they've got teachers around, they've got other Sangha members around, and they're actually having conversations with each other about the Dharma in order to understand it, in order to measure how their own experience fits with what they're being taught. That there's a big, I think dialogue is very much, is like the key here. So I've forgotten what you asked me.
So how does what we're talking about right now about authentic teachers, at whatever level, right? Whatever level of teacher, and how that connects with guru principle?
Oh yeah. So I think then what gradually developed over the years was a sense that actually it's a Sangha that actually has this role of the guru principle. Because although you I came back from the East with this idea that you had this wonderful enlightened guru like Kali Rinpoche or the Karmapa or whoever, and somehow they were the gurus, and people needed to know that. And I wanted people to know there's a difference between a realized master and ordinary teachers. But then as time went on, I realized people don't get the chance to spend time like I did talking to great enlightened beings. They may meet them, they might get their blessing, they might get some connection with them, but it's going to be up to the people like myself around them who are going to be able to be the people they have conversation with. So then it seemed to me, it's in principle, the conversations are taking them to the source of the blessing of the lineage, which is coming through, great enlightened beings like the ones I've met. But actually, the conversations and their own nature and the quality of the teaching and the power of the blessing all works together. And it's all, in principle, it's all coming from the Buddha and the Buddha's activity in the world, which is actually still able to affect beings directly. And I do believe that the Buddha's activity is affecting us directly, and it is waking us because we have that Buddha nature. And that any teacher, whether they're just an ordinary person like myself, or whether they're an amazing enlightened being like the ones that perhaps, there were more of in the past than perhaps there are now, but that kind of, we all can actually serve as a link. And we only need a link because we have Buddha nature in ourselves. But the power of the Buddhas is there to bless us. We can open to it. We can pray. We can actually, this is what I think of as Guru Yoga. We can actually open out to that as a sort of universal primordial principle. And we meet it in the people who actually bring it to us and show us in all different ways. And this ties in with very much with the way Tibetans would hear Guru and Guru principle. And I noticed Her Holiness Khandro Rinpoche was using the word Guru principle. And I was interested that Tibetans would pick that word up because you don't need the word principle in Tibetan. But, it's very natural with the way they think of Guru to add this word principle. So does that answer your question a bit?
Wonderfully. What I love about the term guru principle, among other things, is how it immediately, for me anyway, immediately moves into the qualities rather than the person. And it is an interesting thing, that when going back to, I think, something we brought up right in the beginning, that often when people come to Tibetan Buddhist paths, particularly, I don't know about other Buddhist paths, I'm familiar with this one, they think, oh, I need a llama, because this is often stressed, particularly in the Kagyu tradition, which I'm part of, as are you. And some of us can misunderstand that as meaning one single individual, and that we have to go seek out that one single individual who's going to, using your model, fulfill those 12 roles, right? Or at least like 9 of them or something, right? They're going to be everything for us. And sometimes we do meet that person, like just depending on whatever, our situation, you could say our karma, but many of us may not. And then the question for people can become, how do I make an authentic connection? Is it that I need to make it with like the one person that I have some access to, and how do I look at them as my guru? And so by using guru principle, we're connecting with the meaning of it, and also moving away from it as being too person individual based. And so that's very freeing.
I think Riggs Shikpa made a very interesting observation when he said that as Westerners, we tend to either become too personal, fixating on a person and a personality, or too impersonal, so that we just sort of think, oh, well, there's just me and it's up to myself, and no real relationship with a person who is actually able to teach you, or a number of people are able to teach you. And I think that's so true. We do tend to go either too much to personal or too much to impersonal. And I noticed, when he said that, I thought, oh yeah, I recognize it in my own journey, really, the struggle that I've had over the years, especially to start with, about trying to get too personal, and then that not really working, and then getting too impersonal, and then not really relating to the teacher properly. Just trying to get the right touch there.
And that also brings up another thing that I think about a lot, is how our relationships change as we go along. Mm-hmm. So if this is a path that you're very interested in, and so you are putting in a lot of your time, as many of us do, you mature over time. So a lot of the things like I think what Riggs and Shikpa said is perfect. It's true. We're very binary. It's either all this or all that. It's either everything's empty and therefore, doesn't exist, or everything exists, right? We have this difficulty of holding sometimes some of these paradoxes. And our relationships with each other include those paradoxes, which we all know through our families, through our loved ones, through our friends, and this is also true of how we relate to Sangha, to Sangha and those who are our teachers, who are very dear to us. And we admire them and we appreciate them. And there may be some things that maybe don't fit sometimes quite so well. So how do we work with those difficulties? And being able to talk about it, I think, is really important. And so not to have it necessarily have it hidden away, just be able to talk about when you do have difficulties, how do you handle it? Maybe sometimes the best thing is you step away. Maybe not, but we also have to look as students at our responsibility. But teachers also have to think about their responsibility, which goes back to what I was saying before. A lot of times people are thrown into roles as teachers, sometimes, a little bit before maybe they're ready, but that's okay. They can grow into it, but often without a lot of support. And that's really tough. Really tough.
I think that's especially true for Western teachers.
But it's also been very true, I must say, I just out of care, for a lot of the Tibetan and Himalayan teachers who are sent to the West.
That's true.
That as we struggle with cultural things and we're starting to be aware of them more and more and talk about them, so do they. So it goes both ways, that being able to talk about what are our expectations, and what expectations are reasonable and appropriate, and which ones are maybe not don't fit the situation.
I think there's an assumption quite often that the teacher has, I don't know, they have authority, they have power, they've got all these superior qualities, and then the student is kind of pathetic and vulnerable and they need to be cared for and looked after in a way that somehow they've got a right to that. And I find that dynamic problematic, because when the teachers are not supported, like for myself, I haven't ever been taught how to teach. I've been taught, but no support as a teacher, except, the teachers would say, oh yes, she's teaching, she's good, she's, but which is already something. But yeah, and gradually over the years, picking up colleagues in other sanghas, which has meant a lot to me, actually, finding colleagues in other sanghas. But this kind of attitude of entitlement, and an attitude of, well, this is a church, it should be free, forgetting the fact that the church is able to give free teachings because it used to tax people, and they had these rich donations that actually established them in the first place. So there are a lot of unrealistic attitudes about how teachers are going to support themselves and that kind of thing. And then once you do start thinking of supporting teachers, this is one of the things that we're facing as a Sangha, really, is then how do you take that forward? How do you support people to spend a life living Dharma, practicing Dharma, teaching Dharma? People have got used to the idea, well, religion should be free. But actually, it's extremely expensive, and there's a lot of enthusiasm in the West for supporting monasteries in the East. You're supporting people to practice all their lives, and they start with little children, which you don't have high expectations from them, and then they live their whole life in the monastery, and the monastery is supported. That is extremely expensive. So if we're going to have a really strong tradition in the West, it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost. And I think that's something that in the West we haven't really got prepared ourselves for. I think we still have this notion that Dharma, somehow I have a right to it and I should be looked after. And the people who are looking after me, well, they're fine. They've got all the power. I think, what?
This is so true. It's so true. It is expensive. It's expensive in a few ways: time, money, and effort.
Yeah.
And these are, some of these, especially time, is in short supply for many of us these days. So if we care about, if we value this, and I do, and you do, and all of us probably, and all of us listening do, right? That's why we're here. If we value it, we have to put time in, we have to put our intelligence in and effort in the right way. And time is a big one, like just the continuity, like doing this, studying, practicing, being in the world, being with people, being with our families, being with Sangha. And all of this is like this marinating that we as human beings need to absorb, transform ourselves, or bring out our Buddha nature and share it with others. And it isn't that it's easy to bring it down to these simple principles, like what we're doing, these simple points, but actually does take a lot of time and care to nurture it properly. So when we talk about training teachers, so there is some discussion about this now, and I like the point you just mentioned quickly, because I've been thinking about this for our conversation about, you said you hadn't been taught how to teach. This is a really interesting point that has a cultural element to it. So for us Westerners, when we study a lot, we might be naturally good at teaching our subject, but then again, we might not. And we might stay as researchers, technicians of a certain kind, people who write books, our whole life, be fantastic at our subject, but not know how to communicate it to others. Or we might learn how to communicate it to others, and we might learn on the job, maybe as a university professor, or we might actually go to teacher training, and we might actually think about the principles of teaching, and then you try it out and you get better at it, and you critique yourself, and but within kind of models that should be helpful to you. And in our traditional Buddhist way, you apprentice yourself to Buddhism. And you study, and hopefully you also meditate, you practice, you may be called upon to teach. And so you do it by starting out as like a teacher's assistant, or however it's called, and you gradually go along, but you're also doing it typically based on what you've seen, like how you've been taught. You repeat that, and that's part of the authentic way of passing on the tradition. And of course you'll have your own personality, and you may be, if you're kind of gifted at it, you may be a little bit innovative or experimental, and that may work really well. All of it's kind of an organic process. But for those of us who are in this transitional phase, like the way we've been trained may not be the way other Westerners will benefit most from studying and practicing Buddhism. So this is a huge challenge for us. I'd be interested to hear what you think about this.
Oh, definitely. I think that was the first thing I realized when His Holiness had come up, 16th Karmapa sent me back to the West to teach after 5.5 years. I mean, it's like no time at all. And put me in this, student's flat in Manchester. He said, "Oh yes, go there and teach everything you know to this young student who later became Lama Jamba Taye." But and I just thought, what relevance does what I've been doing? I've had all day long for 5 years to follow the Tibetan tradition of meditation, of recitation, frustrations and chanting, and I've done everything the way Tibetans would when they had all the time in the world. So these are people who are coming in for some teaching, and they're living their life in the city. So what of what I've learned can they actually now pick up and work with? And I thought I was really quite horrified, I think. But luckily, I didn't have to stay in that situation very long, because I got called into being a translator for Lama Gendon in France. So that let me off the hook. And I could see, like as his translator, I could see that big gap between the way he was teaching and the way it was being received. And I knew I was right. I mean, the famous example where Rinpoche is told, these are new people, they don't know anything about Buddhism whatsoever, and they've come to meet you as a great Lama. And of course his presence was radiant and wonderful and inspiring. So then he said, okay, so think that Avalokiteshvara has white with 4 arms, is sitting on the crown of your head, and you're looking at him with eyes of complete devotion, tears streaming out of devotion, and praying to him and I thought, oh my goodness, what will anybody in this room make of that? He's taken so many assumptions, and yet all he was saying was really something that you can say quite simply in English. Like you open your heart to that sense of an all-pervading feeling of love and kindness coming from, the awakened beings who've realized the true nature of our being. And immediately, I think people would sort of kind of, open your heart, something greater than myself. That possibly we're familiar with that somehow. Maybe it reminds us a bit about, maybe something, if we're Christian, it has some sort of resonance. And if we're not Christian, maybe it has a kind of intuitive sense of Oh, yes, a different dimension and love. And well, yes, you don't need to have a picture with 4 arms in a foreign dress and on the top of your head where you don't need that. I mean, it might help at some point, but if you're going to get in there to get a real sense of what it's about, you can just use ordinary English, ordinary words. And that's very much the principles that I teach. I mean, it was Rigzu Shikpa who actually came up with the ground plan for discovering the heart of Buddhism. But it's very, I suppose, the part of it which really develops that finding your own words for what we're talking about. I guess that's my contribution to the course, to really break it down. And how do we respond to a word like openness? Just naturally, it already has a kind of resonance. And then you can actually take that further, and you might use imagery for it, but you don't take it as a given that people will automatically like a little white figure with 4 arms. You know, it's not a given. Some people might and some might not. But I think that's maybe that's a bit of an answer to your question.
Thank you. You know, I have another thing I want to, because I'm also, watching the clock. I know we're going to finish up fairly soon, and we've talked about a lot of different things. But to kind of tie this together about maybe where we started was, Guru is principle, and then we switched and we used the Tibetan word llama, which is a title, and we talked about titles and why we need to use them, and of course how we need to be aware of what's involved when we use them, people's projections, and also we all know, of course, the responsibilities if you're given such a title. And I was also thinking about how we give titles. And I know you asked me right at the very beginning, I didn't really answer it of, why don't I use a title? The simple answer is I wasn't given one. So back in my day, when I finished 3-year retreat, my particular group, and this isn't true for all groups at that time either, our particular group, they didn't say to us in a formal sense, you may now be called Lama. And I don't really know why, but at the time I was young, I was 26 or something, and I thought that was fine. It seemed appropriate to me not to have what sounded like a very lofty title bestowed on any of us who were most of us were pretty young coming through these retreat programs without, as I say, a lot of preparation. And I really took to heart something the Dalai Lama said to us when I was in retreat. I was very fortunate, and a lot of lamas came in and visited, the Dalai Lama being one of them. And he said to us, "This is the beginning." And I thought, yes, thank you. Because sometimes a lot of pressure on people going into 3-year retreat. You put it on yourself. You think you're supposed to be something when you come out, like semi-awakened. But you're not. And you feel, like, where are you? You're in really some kind of bardo. But by saying that, it's a beginning. So it's part of an education process, actually. And so the traditional education models for teachers is Shedra, monastic college, which if you complete it, you're given and you complete it properly, with whatever you pass properly, according to your tradition, maybe Geshe or Kempo, and you have a particular role And more recently, starting at the time of Janggon Lodru Tai, there's a tradition of a set meditation curriculum for a set period of time called 3-year retreat. And there is this idea that after a 3-year retreat, you're called llama. In Tibet, and even nowadays, you see this. Actually, the title people get who complete that is not exactly lama. It is called drupla. So the adding the drup part, like which refers to drupkong or 3-year retreat lama, that means that. Like it doesn't mean that you are lama, like more like moving towards guru, but rather it's an acknowledgement that you have done a certain type of meditation training. But in both these cases, all that has happened is you've gone through an education process. So in monastic college, you go through an education process. In a 3-year retreat, you go through an education process. And this is when we talk traditionally about the qualities of teacher. I use that word more frequently, but you could say lama. We talk about 3 things. In Tibetan, it's Ke, Tsen, Zang. So I know you're familiar with it. And K, I would say, you're educated. So that's like basic. Of course, you have to be educated, like whatever degree of education, sure. You're educated, but it doesn't stop there with the education. Then it talks about the tsun, which is maybe like, your ethical conduct, your moral conduct, your character. And then the third one being zang, which is literally translates as good, which is an interesting one because it's so general. What do we mean by good? Excellence. Like it may be like you're a good person. You have good qualities. Or it could mean like you're really special. Like there's something special, but still it's that 3-fold thing. It's not just you're educated. So to think that everybody who goes through a particular program, whether it's a monastic college program or a 3-year retreat program, actually they have a certain type of education, but it goes back to what I was saying, like it's for yourself. I mean, yes, you do it for others, but really just educating your mind stream in a certain way. And you aren't being taught how to teach. And nor is it really certifying that you are also, you hope if you choose people to go through those programs that they are also ethical and that they're good. But it's not really a certification of program, exactly, if that makes sense.
And in the end, I think what happens is people notice that you're good. If you live in a community, this is where Sangha becomes important. If you live in a community where people have a good sense of what a good practitioner feels like to be in the company of a good practitioner, then they can actually recognize each other and say that that's a good practitioner. They have a feel to them. I remember talking to a Tibetan once about this. We have a feel. We have a feel for somebody who's a practitioner, and I think they do actually. And they, maybe they met it when they were a child in a particular member of the family who had this quality of a really good practitioner, and they kind of use it as a baseline when they're meeting people. They sense that. I think I generally have found that in the East actually more than in the West, where you do meet it in the West where people have that sense, but they often very easily don't trust it. And they do trust something which is actually more like a qualification, or I don't know, we're more impressed by people with flair or people who, who can kind of entertain us, or we enjoy their company more than actually a really sensed feeling of this is a good person. And I noticed that. It's I think in the West we've kind of almost not completely lost it, but not really recognizing, honoring, and trusting it in the way that, probably more traditional societies. I think in a society like our own, where there's a lot of moving about, there's a lot of subcultures, there's a lot of things vying for our attention, I think it's difficult to get that sense of connection to a good person, and to recognize that goodness is what matters. That's what matters. I mean, your A-level results, they don't matter actually. Your education in terms of whether you passed your exams or not, it doesn't really matter. Whether you're a good person or not, everybody would agree that matters. But how often do they really honor it? To what extent do our society really put that up there as what's really important about another person? I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
It's so true. And so then the question would be for us, Buddhists, like how do we bring that out in ourselves and in others, and acknowledge that in ways that is appreciation for it? And because just if we think about training people, and yes, education is incredibly important. There's no question. I mean, knowing Buddhist texts is important. In every generation, we want some people to be scholars and good people too, and practitioners, right? But if we only focus on that, then are we missing these other parts, the Sun and Zong, the character of the person and their goodness, because we're placing all of our focus on educational criteria.
That's right. And as Westerners, I mean, I notice when I'm teaching people over time, that's because that's how I like to teach, rather than go out and teach and then leave people. I really like to teach people over time and to take care of them over time. And I notice it comes out more and more how, I would say, damaged people are by the competitive way we educate people. That, you educate people to try and be top. And if you're not top, then you failed. So most people fail in their education. Most people feel, when I'm trying to teach them how to meditate or how to look at the nature of their mind, they feel they're failing. They feed back to me, I feel I'm failing, I'm a failure, I can't do it. And I think, where's that coming from? It's their education, the way they're educated, rather than thinking, you say that, but actually I find this. And then we can look at that together with some sort of confidence that, the fact that I don't find it the way you described it means that I failed. It means I'm not finding it the way you described it. So what's going on? It takes some kind of confidence, doesn't it? And I find that's one of the things that perhaps I feel is the most important thing that I try to teach to people, to have that kind of confidence, and not to feel, there's a class of people called failures, which people do believe. They actually believe they can be a failure. And I feel so grateful to my parents that they didn't bring me up with that idea. I mean, yes, there were other problems, but there was not that feeling that it was, making a mistake, an honest mistake, is a way to learn. Not a thing that you've got to try and avoid. I won't say anything because I might make a mistake. No, say it and see if it is a mistake. That's how you learn. Those kind of things.
Yes, of course, reminds me of our own teachers saying, which whenever you do something small, usually that was wrong, he would always say in Tibetan, "Norsing, norsing, yandat lam ladro." It's by making mistake after mistake that we find the unmistaken path. And then I loved it when Rinpoche would say that, and he said it so playfully, that was a lovely part of it too. But as I go on and age, I think, yes, but actually that is the way we learn. Actually, you learn by getting it wrong.
Mm.
And then and then you adjust a little bit. Of course, if you stay with the wrong, you go off on like some other tangent. But so yes, confidence, not being afraid to be wrong, knowing that being wrong is the way you get it right. Yeah.
Right. An honest wrong, an honest, this is what's going on. Maybe it's wrong, but okay, this is it. Now, what can I learn from that? That's how I'm seeing it. Because we see things wrong. That's why we're here, suffering. So yeah, go in there and have a look at what that really is. And I suppose as a teacher, I feel very committed to that principle, to try to work with people to help them have confidence, to be able to look for themselves and trust themselves and their own, where they are right now and moving on from there. Yeah. Using their own words.
And this is what the Buddhist path is about. Alleviating our suffering and having us recognize our innate wisdom and compassion, our Buddha nature. So as principles of teaching, what could be better?
And as you say,
I did notice. Go ahead.
Go ahead. What you said about always learning. I mean, I do feel that actually one of the reasons I really love teaching is because I'm always learning by, listening to the students and what they're saying, and then looking at the text and learning and constantly new insights are arising from this very same material. Often you don't need to learn a lot of texts.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just noticing Dashu appeared on our screen, and I didn't know if he wanted to
wind it up.
Yeah, jump in and wrap it up for us.
Well, I was actually going to ask a question, but I'm afraid it's going to take us down a bit of a wormhole, and maybe it's best left for another time. However, a lot of the talk has been around kind of Western teachers and the different roles that Western teachers play, and particularly this last discussion around education and character and ethics. And yet what I noticed we haven't touched on here is the role of, let's say, Samaya or Tendrel or Adhisthana, and the connection, the power of blessing in the relationship, and how we're managing that from a Western point of view, because it seems to come very easily when we're relating to a Tibetan. As you said, Lama, we can receive a blessing from them. Do we have enough confidence in the principle of Adhisthana within this student-teacher relationship coming as Westerners? I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that, knowing that we're also running out of time. So another sort of 4 or 5 minutes on your thoughts on that.
You want to say anything, Elizabeth?
Oh, please say something, Lama Shampen. And also, I just want to say for people who are not familiar with the term Adhisthana, that it's often translated into English as blessing. And you could even talk, Lama Shampen, about your feelings about that translation too. But I'd love to hear you respond to what Dashu's brought up.
Yeah, I think it relates to what we're saying about the Buddha's spontaneous activity of love and compassion, which is always there, radiating through all our experience, although we don't really appreciate it. So it's like a presence. And that has an effect on that, and it's having an effect on us. So if we relate to all our experience as the guru coming to us in order to dissolve our confusion and misunderstandings and mistakes, then it comes as something that's empowering us. Adhisthana empowers us. Like, I don't know what the word blessing means to anyone else. But to me, it was the first word I came across when I got out to India, and was with the the hippies all around the lamas, and they were talking, oh, it's a blessing, it's a blessing. And I said, what is blessing? I've never heard of this word before, and I don't know what it's supposed to mean, and nobody had another word for it. But then as the decades went by, I gradually realized how key this word adhisthana, or blessing, is in terms of how to relate to the guru as the Buddha, guru as the person who's bringing you the teaching, the guru as your own true nature, which is actually also pervaded with this love and compassion that we're not, and wisdom of understanding and insight, that we have it actually. And the guru's blessing is what's the word? Is triggering it in us, is kind of getting it moving, getting it working, is connecting with it. So that's my quick answer.
Did you have anything to say in terms of this relationship with adhisthana with Western teachers, and if there's any sort of distinction here that we're making? Or
I think a lot of, this is what I'm trying to do within the Sangha, is actually, what I'm trying to do with this book as well, is to get people to realize they could open themselves to that adhisthana all the time. And it fits with the way Tibetans talk about the guru. Your parents are your guru, your school teachers are your guru, everybody you're learning from, the world itself is the guru. So it generalizes very easily when you're speaking Tibetan, in a way that in English we're going to have to kind of find a way of expressing it that sounds natural. What would you say, Elizabeth?
For adhisthana?
Yeah, on this whole question about Westerners
on the whole question,
approaching them as if they had adhisthana, rather than it's a setup that Tibetans do, a setup, and they call it blessing, and we all take it and think it's lovely. To what extent can Westerners play that role for Westerners?
I think, like you, that it takes some time to kind of really contemplate like what this means. I too struggle with the word blessing, and I use it as a translator just because it's a convention, and I don't know that we have something better. But to me, I like the word something like inspire, and although that's a little bit weak, but I can't think of a better one right at the moment, but then we feel that inspiration. It comes from us, and it's sparked by others. It's sparked by as you say, the phenomenal world. Maybe we also use a word like this in English. We use the word energy, which is, so multi-purpose. But sometimes we say that about somebody, oh, they have a really good energy, or I feel energized, or like, being around them is like, there's a good energy. I think it has, even though that again is a weak quality and sounds almost new agey, but if we think about that, it's that ability of others to influence us in this really positive way, just open us up, but it connects with something within ourselves. As you were saying, like it's not just like coming, like we visualize a stream of blessings coming, but it has to touch your mind, your heart, and in that sense, it comes from you too, right? So it's that connection quality that we have. So of course, we can have it with Westerners, and with the world around us. Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much for that. It's a really kind of long topic to discuss in such a short time. So we've come to the end of it, and I want to say on behalf of everybody who is here and everyone who's listening, I've felt that inspiration from listening to you both teaching and talking and sharing your years of thinking around these subjects and your experience in working with us. And yeah, the challenges that are in front of us as Westerners bringing this profound and liberating Dharma into the world. And so thank you, both of you, for this conversation, and thank both of you for all of your practice and your dedication and your time and your teachings. And I hope that at some point we can invite you both to continue this discussion, because there's so much that we didn't touch on that I would really like to hear more about, and I'm sure I speak for everybody. So thank you both so much. Just for everybody else online, of course, this talk was coinciding with, or does coincide with, the launch of Lama Shenpen's book, The Guru Principle, which is there in front of Lama. You can buy it, of course, from the Shambhala website. I've just popped that in the chat there, but I think it's also available from wherever else. And you'll also come across many of Elizabeth's texts on the Shambhala website too. And so thank you all so much. And yeah, so many gratitude for being here. Thank you for joining us, everybody who's online and listening. And I look forward at some point to seeing you all again.